Foreign ministers from Afghanistan's neighboring countries gather in China for a summit to promote regional stability. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. Representatives from China, Pakistan, Iran, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan met in Tunxi in eastern China to discuss the future of Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. Peace in the region is critical for the success of major Chinese projects, including the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. President Xi Jinping sent a message to the group urging cooperation. He said Afghanistan's neighbors should do their best to build consensus and coordinate with each other to support the Afghan people in creating a bright future. Since the Taliban takeover Afghanistan last August, it has not been recognized by any country. Afghan assets also remain frozen, contributing to a worsening humanitarian crisis. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is now seeking billions in aid.
Our funding appeal for Afghanistan this year is $4.4 billion, the world's largest appeal for a single country.
To discuss this and more, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Nordhausen, Germany, Saeed Fahim Sadat is the head of the Department of Masters in International Relations at Cardan University. Here in Washington, D.C. is Anton Fadyashin. He is a professor of history at American University. Also in the U.S. Capitol, Ahmad Shah Mohibi is the founder and president of Rise to Peace. And from Beijing, China, we're joined by Victor Gao. He is the chair professor at Soochow University. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Victor, these meetings, which of course includes China and major regional players, are trying to address the humanitarian and political crisis in Afghanistan right now. What are your expectations?
Well, first of all, this meeting is very important. This is the first meeting ever after the withdrawal of the U.S. troops and NATO troops from Afghanistan last year. And it gathered all the 6 neighboring countries together, plus Russia, and also, amazingly, plus the representative of the United States. So this also marked a very first time ever since the outbreak of the Ukraine war on February the 24th, that the foreign ministers of Russia and the special envoy of the United States on Afghanistan would meet together on the sideline of this meeting. Now, we know that China, as a matter of fact, was a victim of the 20-year-old war in Afghanistan led by the United States and NATO, especially China's Xinjiang province, because Xinjiang actually bordered with Afghanistan. And the spillover of extremism radicalization from Afghanistan into Xinjiang was actually a real thing that we need to deal with. However, the fact that the United States and many other Western countries even tried to turn the table and accuse China of doing things beyond recognition in Xinjiang was very hurtful of the feelings of the people in Xinjiang as well as in the world. So this time for China to host this very important meeting to talk about reconstruction and peace building in Afghanistan after the hasty withdrawal of the U.S. troops last year will be marked as a landmark because it encourages dialogue, it encourages reconciliation, and it focuses on what Afghanistan can do as a point of connectivity, as a point of commitment to peace and development going forward. Now, this meeting does not aim at resolving all the problems in Afghanistan. There will be huge challenges in Afghanistan, but I truly believe if we focus on peace and stability and growth and development, the problems in Afghanistan will be reduced, and Afghanistan will no longer be a springboard of extremism and radicalization, which not only hurt the people of the Afghanistan people themselves, but also countries way beyond this part of the world. So there is a lot of expectation for this meeting to really yield good results.
Saeed Fahim Sadat, a senior Afghan foreign ministry official, Shafiullah Azam, had this to say before the meeting. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The main topic would be Afghanistan regional connectivity and economic cooperation between these countries. And on the other hand, it is unannounced recognition of Afghan government.
So is this some kind of, as the guest there put it, unannounced recognition of the Taliban? Of course, the Taliban are now in charge of Afghanistan. Does this meeting confer on them some kind of tacit recognition?
China has been following a very cautious approach towards Afghanistan. We thought that after the U.S. withdrawal, the vacuum that is being created will be filled by China very soon. But as we saw, the Chinese foreign minister coming to Kabul after 6 months, seems that China is not willing to make things go fast, and is very cautious. Of course,
Saeed, I'm sorry, we're having problems with your connection.
Right, regional and global power. But
okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. And the Taliban's viewpoint for China is more of an economic partner, and they also expect China to jump into the recognition issue, because they see some of the values which the West is at odds with Taliban being of less importance to China. But as we see, China is cautious, and China do share his concerns with the Taliban, particularly in terms of security concerns, their relationship with Al-Qaeda, with other armed groups, of particular the Haqqani network, and its relationship with the rest of the armed groups. And until there are clear assurances from the Taliban side and steps taken, I think China would withhold
Okay. All right. Anton Fedyashin, I'm going to get back to a point that Victor mentioned a moment ago, and that is the fact that there is an envoy from the United States as well as an envoy from Russia, and they're going to be in the same room. In fact, these special envoys, and they come from Afghanistan, China, Russia, and the United States. This is a group known as the Extended Troika. They will convene, and as I said, it puts Russia and the United States in the same room during the Ukraine crisis. How significant is that?
Well, it's significant in the sense that the Russians are sort of playing a more leading role at this meeting than the Americans are. I don't expect any breakthroughs for the Ukraine crisis to come out of this. But look, this is a sign that if the United States and Russia compartmentalize their foreign policies, there are certainly places where they can work together, and anyone can benefit from that. Everyone can benefit from that. I think the way that the Afghanistan's neighbors are handling Afghanistan really stands in stark contrast to the way that the Ukrainian disaster has been handled by all sides, but also, of course, especially the West, over the past 8 years. There in Eastern Europe, we see an example of zero-sum competition, NATO trying to pull Ukraine into its sphere of influence. And here in Central Asia, where the economic situation on the ground and the humanitarian situation on the ground in Afghanistan is also very serious, although there are no military actions going on. Here we have all of the neighbors actually coming together and trying to find a way out that suits everyone. This is a reminder that for Russia, for the Russians, for the Chinese, for the Afghans, for the Pakistanis, and everyone else involved, Eurasia is not a chessboard. Eurasia is their home. No one's going anywhere. They have to live with each other. And that makes them willing and able, and it creates the political will to find solutions where otherwise problems would arise. So I think in many ways, the tragedy of Afghanistan is also a way forward for other parts of Eurasia, including Ukraine.
Ahmad Shah Mohibi, I'm going to get back to the point I was discussing with Saeed, and that's the Afghan official telling us that this is some kind of unannounced recognition, as he put it, of the Taliban. But it seems the message at these meetings is that there's going to be nothing for nothing here. The Taliban has to step up as well before it gets any kind of recognition. Do you think this will be enough of a motivating factor for the Taliban to implement some of the reforms that have been called for?
Well, it has the Chinese hosting the Taliban an extended troika. It has a direct impact on the Taliban legitimacy or the Taliban political agenda moving forward. You know, you didn't have to be in Afghanistan to recognize the Taliban. You could, for the past 20 years, the Chinese mining companies have been in Afghanistan, and for the first time, their foreign minister last week visited Kabul and met with Muttaqi. So these are all signs that the United States rivals in the region are interested to take a part in Afghanistan. And also, let's not forget about this: that China's interest in Afghanistan, the One Belt, One Road initiative, and also the CPAC, the Chinese-Pakistan corridor investment, is the key here. And also, the China also looking into insurance from the Taliban, assurance of the Uyghurs at the border. And because at the end of the day, if it's the China, it's the Pakistan, it's other countries, United States, terrorism is a common enemy. But these meetings, this trilateral meeting, it's a good start. But I think it's time. We're looking from 2018 to this date. The narrative has to be changed. It's all this giving to the Taliban and talks. The Taliban get most out of the table. But including this last one, this meeting concluded the Taliban are expecting that the world, the Chinese and the Russian authorities to recognize them while the U.S. is engaged in this other proxy in Ukraine. So it should change the narrative from giving everything to the Taliban, listening to them, then having them responsible for commitments that they have delivered or they promised to deliver. I mean, look, for example, they say education for all, they're banning girls. They say human rights, they're doing all abduction, torturing, and killing former Afghan security forces. And I think they say, the Taliban are off their beard, but the people didn't have bread. So there's a lot of issues domestically and also foreign side that needs to be worked in order for the Taliban to be able to deliver in action. I think these meetings are good, but it's time to change the narrative, keep the Taliban accountable, and looking into what other foreign actors can play. So I think, it could play something out.
Right. Victor Gar, what do you make of those points that were just raised there, that, there should be some firmer conditions placed upon the Taliban at this stage?
You are raising a very important question. Now, on the one hand, Taliban is the party in governance of the whole of Afghanistan. There is no other alternative force as we speak in Afghanistan which can either topple the Taliban government or to replace it, or for real democratic elections to be held in Afghanistan. This is the harsh reality. Now, on the other hand, no country has recognized the Taliban government. Why? Because there are still many important things that the Taliban regime need to do to reform itself. Now, there are many things, but allow me to just single out one thing. That is to allow boys and girls, especially girls, to go to school. This is truly a right of the Afghan people, including the Afghan girls. Now, depriving the Afghan girls from going to school, to middle school, high school, and then to college, for example, and to pursue their own independent career will not only be a great loss for these girls in Afghanistan, but it will be a huge loss for the Afghan people as a whole, for Afghanistan as a country. So I do hope, while there are many other things that Taliban need to do, at least allow the Afghan girls to go to school. This is something that the United States, in its 20 years of occupation of Afghanistan, has not really fundamentally addressed. Now is the time for Afghans, 6 neighboring countries, for all the other countries which may have a stake in the stability of Afghanistan, to gather on the same table and to exchange ideas that while your religion and your faith need to be respected, I don't think by excluding girls from going to school will serve your religion or your faith. I think the God will be really very graceful and very happy to see girls to go to school. This is a way out for Afghanistan.
Okay, we are going to take a break right now. Coming up, more on our conversation about the Afghanistan meeting in China. You're watching The Heat.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences, or relates to the whole world. Global business, only on CGTN. All you need to know about China. China 24, only on CGTN.
No war, no one again can holding guns. Guns, something words, protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time. Now, what is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing the latest on a third meeting of the foreign ministers of Afghanistan's neighboring countries. Let's get back to our panel right now. And Saeed Fahim Sadat, I want to get back to the point that Victor raised just a moment ago before the break, and that is on the question of girls going to school. Now, there is one thing that China, the United States, Russia, and Pakistan are in agreement on, and they are in agreement on the fact that there is a need for the Taliban to live up to its commitments to build a truly inclusive government. But if we look at what they've just done with girls' education, reneged on a promise to reopen schools for girls, doesn't that put a huge question mark over their commitment to reform and change?
In the second gathering of the regional countries or the neighboring countries in October, they also collectively called on the Taliban to be more inclusive, which yet didn't happen. And the Taliban's renege of their promise on girls' education seems that the hardliners are still in power. They are largely calling the shots. And also, it apparently seems that the Taliban are using the reopening of the schools for girls above grade 6 as a trump card against the Western countries to get more concessions on other fronts, which is unfortunate. Because the people of Afghanistan and also the international community were expecting the Taliban to live up to their promise. But apparently, it seems that the hardliners are still powerful within the movement, and they are not much of in favor of girls' education because they assume that opening much would somehow provoke some of the file and rungs within their movement to slide towards ISK and other radical groups. So in order to prevent that, they are being cautious. But this overall is harming a generation which needs to truly go to school and pursue education.
Anton Fedyashin, as we heard a moment ago, Afghanistan is facing a huge humanitarian crisis. We heard the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres tell us that the organization has appealed for aid to the tune of $4.4 billion, the world's largest appeal for a single country. And now we, of course, have the conflict in Ukraine, and I'm wondering what kind of impact that is having on food supply lines, especially to a country like Afghanistan. Russia and Ukraine are both exporters of food. How will this complicate the crisis in Afghanistan? There's something like 9 million people who are facing famine in that country, and we have figures that tell us that 95% of the population right now do not have enough to eat.
Anand, that's right. The crisis or the war in Ukraine will complicate not only the Afghan issue, but the entire food supply for the global south, including South Asia, because so many of the countries from North Africa, from Morocco, all the way down to Vietnam depend on supplemental food supplies from both Ukraine and Russia, both of which are some of the world's biggest producers of grains and other foodstuffs. This is a question, of course, for NATO and the broader West. No one seems to have really taken seriously the global implications of the Ukraine crisis, of NATO expansion. One, of the war in Ukraine, two, and then its economic repercussions. For the Russians, the question of poverty in Afghanistan is also, of course, a question of regional security. This is important because the poorer Afghanistan is and the more desperate its poor people are, the more likely they will be to turn to what they have historically turned to, unfortunately, and that's, of course, poppy flowers and then drugs, heroin, and most of those flow through Central Asia into Russia. And it's not just, of course, the health effects of addictive drugs such as heroin and others, it's also the crime networks that come with them. So Afghanistan is a very serious issue. The food crisis is a serious issue, and it has very serious security ramifications, not just for Russia, but for all of Afghanistan's neighbors.
Ahmad Shah Mohibi, the United States has announced an aid package to Afghanistan. It said that it will contribute aid to Afghanistan. In fact, this is what the U.S. ambassador to the UN had to say. Let's listen to her.
The United States is announcing today nearly $204 million in new humanitarian assistance funding for the UN and our non-governmental partners to deploy in Afghanistan and in support of Afghans in the region. This humanitarian aid, like all aid from the United States, will go directly to NGOs and the United Nations. The Taliban will not control our humanitarian funding.
So, Ahmed, what do you make of that? I mean, that's $200 million. It's just a fraction of the billions of dollars that has been seized by the United States and redistributed to others. Will this help?
It will. We're looking at 95% of Afghanistan, according to UN, living below the poverty line, 9 million in famine, and 23 million facing hunger. So, of course, this 1 billion is going to help Afghanistan, but we have to be more factful in terms of like how the aid is going to be controlled and monitored. Of course, Taliban will have a play into it. But yes, Afghanistan is going some of the most harsh economic crisis in the world. And look, 75% of Afghanistan GDP before the collapse was on foreign aid. We're looking at the government since August. There's no income, there's no foreign aid. And of course, any kind of aid going into Afghanistan is going to help. But the question of sustainability, work, inclusiveness, governance, a system to generate revenue is missing in Afghanistan. Afghanistan for the past 20 years, it was built on a dependency of economic, financial security politically. And we saw the result, what happened. The Taliban took over, the institution collapsed. So looking forward, the strong institution and the Taliban willingness to work on inclusiveness. And we look into this political meetings in China. we should ask, where are all the political leaders who are in neighboring countries? So you cannot just talk to the Taliban while just forgetting or ignoring or isolating all the political leaders on the other side of the world. So there is no government, there is no institution, you cannot reduce poverty, you cannot have stability. I think it's time for the Taliban to stop with these fancy words and deliver in action, because you can send billions of dollars into Afghanistan. We have no clue how that's going to be monitored, because what we see on TV is what the Taliban want us to see.
Victor, another big concern, of course, for the region is terrorism. I mean, to what extent does terrorist activity in the region impact development projects like the one China is involved in? We're talking a moment ago about CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor.
Thank you very much. Before I answer your very important question, just allow me a word very briefly about this U.S. seizure of about $7 billion of reserve of Afghanistan in the United States. Now, this is truly a great shame in our history. Why? Because Afghanistan is one of the least developed country in the world, one of the poorest country in the world, and this about $7 billion. This is not U.S. money. This is not UN money. This is not contribution by any country. This is truly money of the Afghanistan people. So to seize this money and to appropriate it for other purposes really is a great shock, not only to Afghanistan, to the Taliban, but it's a shock to the international community at large. Now, talking about terrorism, Afghanistan for the past 20 years or so has been a hotbed of radicalization, extremism, you name it, not only hurting the people in Afghanistan, but also spilling over to the neighboring countries, including the 6 neighboring countries that are gathered together to talk about Afghanistan issue, but also, allow me to mention this, very, very dangerously into China's Xinjiang autonomous region. Now, we need to gather together to figure out a best way to deal with the root causes of fundamentalism and radicalization and terrorism extremism. Why? Because I think the lack of development, the being neglected by the government or by the other countries' governments, for example, and forcing millions of Afghan people into poverty, this was one of the root causes of radicalization in Afghanistan. We need to shift the gear and focus on development and growth so that Afghan people will feel comfortable staying in their land, working and developing, improving their living standards, and on the other hand, reduce the threat of radicalization inside Afghanistan and also spilling over to neighboring countries.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's been The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.